Okay, we are live here on YouTube for session 4 of our Tough Topics Digital Conference. And thank you for joining us. Before we get started, we want to remind you guys a little bit about what these conversations are. So these are quite simply, they're a chance to give someone who has some knowledge, some expertise, and some experiences in a specific area and around a specific topic, give them a chance to hear, just to hear about or just talk and let us hear about their views on something. And our goal is not to debate. Our goal is not to get to the bottom of anything. Rather, it's just to let them share their perspective. And from there, we're going to take that and over the course of the next few weeks and months, have a chance to work with this content and unpack it. So don't panic if you feel like it's a lot of content and you can't keep up with all of it, or whatever it is. Don't worry, it's okay. We'll have plenty of time to go through it. And we're very excited to hear from our speaker tonight. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to John.
Hey guys. So today we're joined by Justin Giboney. He is an attorney and a political strategist in Atlanta, Georgia. Mr. Giboney has managed successful campaigns for elected officials in the state and referendums related to the city's transportation and water infrastructure. In 2012 and 2016, Georgia's 5th congressional district elected him as a delegate for the Democratic National Convention, and he served as the co-chair of Obama for America's Gen 44 Atlanta Initiative. He is a former Vanderbilt University football player and law student. Justin served on the Urban League of Greater Atlanta Board of Directors, and he's written op-eds for publications such as Christianity Today. Justin, thanks for joining us, man.
Hey, John, thanks for having me. Glad to be here.
All right. Oh, so John, I think you forgot to mention to the text in line. So if you guys have questions while Justin is talking and while we're going through this, you can text those questions in to 262-757-8588. Did I get that right? Cool. All right. So Justin, first question for you. You work with the A.N.D Campaign, and you do a lot with them. So can you just tell us briefly what the A.N.D Campaign is all about?
Sure. The A.N.D Campaign is a Christian civic organization that really wants to help Christians engage politics and culture more faithfully. And so I guess I can kind of start with my background, might be helpful. So as you mentioned, I've been working in politics for over a decade, ran a lot of campaigns, and I was raised in the church, and, one of the things that was kind of frustrating me as I was running campaigns and I had friends who were running for office is that in the progressive space that I was in, there was almost an assumption that they would have to take on secular progressive values. It almost wasn't a question like, well, if I'm going to run, that's just how it is. That's just what we have to do. And that was interesting to me because, there are a lot of people in so-called progressive spaces, especially people coming from the historic, traditional Black church, who have more conservative values on a lot of different issues. There just wasn't that voice. And I was really trying to figure out why that was, and sort of realized that it was about organization, that it was, that a lot of the secular progressive groups in this space had organization, had a lot of resources. And so as happens, they kind of controlled the reward and punishment mechanism in urban politics. And so I kind of set out on a mission to create a little more organization among Christians when it came to politics, initially in urban spaces. But at the same time, I had friends who were Republicans in different parts of the state who felt similar, just in a different direction. They felt like they were kind of having to surrender, where I felt like I was having to surrender my convictions. They felt like they were surrendering their compassion to a certain extent, and that there really wasn't an outlet to say, well, I may be conservative on certain issues, but that doesn't mean I, accept everything kind of uncritically from the ideology. And so with that, one day I was just reading through the Bible, and I got to Ephesians 4:15, and Ephesians 4, we know, talks about unity within the church. And Paul is telling the church of Ephesus that, we mature together. And as we mature, that Christians know what they stand for. So he's basically saying that once you're a mature Christian, you don't fall for everything that comes to you. But he says a mature Christian should always be able to speak the truth in love. And that really stuck with me, that Ephesians 4:15 scripture, we should be able to speak the truth in love. And I said, there's something to that. And what I discovered that he was saying was that the gospel is both truth and love, that it's not one or the other. And unfortunately, I think within the American political landscape, we have a false dichotomy. And that false dichotomy tells us that you have to either choose between love and justice, or you have to choose moral order and righteousness. And that's just not the gospel. I don't think that's a choice that a Christian should make. And so just started kind of reaching out to people who are interested in politics. My co-founders are Sho Baraka, who is a Christian hip hop artist, also Angel Maldonado, who's a pastor here in Atlanta, Georgia. And we came up with the A.N.D Campaign to really address that false dichotomy, to say, no, it's not, do I choose justice or do I choose moral order? We're choosing both. And so A.N.D Campaign literally means justice and moral order, compassion and conviction, love and truth. Because the truth of the matter is, you can't have justice without moral order, and you can't have moral order unless there's justice. And so that's something that I really think Christians shouldn't buy into. And we really started talking to Christians about being Christian first within politics, and not necessarily being partisan or in an ideological tribe first, but really putting your Christianity first and foremost. And it was one of those things where we kind of articulated something that a lot of people had already been thinking. And so I don't ever say that we created it. I think God certainly gave us a vision, but it's something that a lot of Christians saw, but they just hadn't articulated it in the way that we had before. So that's kind of what the A.N.D Campaign means. And our mission is kind of fourfold. Number one, it's about education. We want to raise civic literacy among Christians. We want to make sure that Christians know how the process works, that they have a better handle on the issue, and just really be a resource for churches and Christians when it comes to civic issues. The other part of the education piece is just helping Christians apply biblical values to the issues of the day. Too often we allow our political party to frame the issue for us. And once they frame it, they usually frame it in a way where there isn't, we don't have to think about it too much. The answer is obvious based on how they frame it. But Christians can't do that. Christians have to frame the issues for themselves. And that's one thing that we're really serious about. The other thing is representation. So you have education, representation. A lot of Christians just feel isolated. They feel like they don't have a choice but to choose to go all the way to the left or all the way to the right. And so we want, whether somebody is in Lincoln, Nebraska or Montgomery, Alabama, we want them to be able to see a different way to go about politics. So we're not a group that says you shouldn't be in a party. We think that, participating in the party can be very, a practical matter. As a practical matter, it can be very helpful, but we do think you have to transcend the party. So we want to represent that. The other thing that we're doing is coalition building and working on racial reconciliation. So we really think that when Christians focus on Christian principles first, that we can create the kind of coalition that could really have a serious impact on the political space. And so we really, there are some things that the Bible speaks directly to, and on those things, all Christians, regardless of your color, your party, whatever, should be on the same page. And then there are things that I think we have the option to choose for ourselves. You and I, John, may never agree on the marginal tax rate, but I think that there are some things that we should agree on. I think we should have a general agreement when it comes to abortion, when it comes to criminal justice, things of that nature. We should be on a similar page. And so what we're trying to do is emphasize those things, because, for instance, if we could get people from the traditional Black church where I come from and white evangelicals to say, hey, we might not be in the same party, but there are about 6 or 7 issues that we're going to focus on together, that would really change the political landscape in ways that we haven't seen before. So I think God works, and in the way that he works, he has Christians who are biblical on both sides. We just need to find our common ground, which should be obvious to us, which is the Bible and Christian principles. And then lastly is just the advocacy, giving Christians an on-ramp to advocate for issues from pro-life issues to criminal justice and voter rights issues. There's no reason why someone can't be pro-life and also focus on issues like voter rights or criminal justice, things of that nature. Now, our political landscape says those things are kind of mutually exclusive, but they should never be mutually exclusive. I mean, we're talking about issues that are human dignity issues, and all Christians should be able to come together around that. So in a nutshell, that's what the A.N.D Campaign is about. We're not a partisan organization, but we challenge both sides to be more Christian. We do think there's a problem when it comes to kind of the secular progressive space. You can't surrender your values just to win an election. On the other side, we would say that, you know, in a lot of instances, conservatives have to be more compassionate, and you can't neglect your compassion just to win a race. And so we always say that the witness is more important than the win, that we have to make sure that we're putting off the right civic witness, and the wins can come later.
So you mentioned that the polarization between both parties is kind of what started the ball rolling for you guys. And how did we get there? I mean, there's so many questions that I want to ask to unpack from what you just said, but let's start here. Like, historically, how do we get so polarized today, in your assessment?
Yeah, it's a good question. You know, a lot of people say this is the most polarizing time ever, and it may be. But I also say that, well, if during the civil rights movement we weren't polarized, when there were two sides to that issue, we should have been, right? So I do think there's a lot of polarization here, but I don't necessarily think the issues are worse, or that for some reason there should be more now. I just think that from a political standpoint, you know, it has come to a head, so to speak. And I think it's one reason is how we communicate these days. You know, it is very easy just to focus on confirmation bias. And so you don't really have to listen to the other side. You can just go to different sources and media and just hear what you want to hear. That's one part of it. I think a lot of interest groups kind of took over. And so, you know, the interest groups really have a say, and they actually are doing a lot of things before we even have a conversation or a discourse between the voters. You get these really large special interest groups that come in and kind of make the decisions for the party, and the party makes the decisions for the people. So it's kind of like the tail wagging the dog. And so there's a lot of different reasons why it happens. What our biggest thing is that Christians can't really feed into that. And that's not to say that we can't be passionate when we advocate, but there's a way to go about it with civility and also with humility. And I think those two things are missing when we talk about the polarization in our system currently.
You kind of stole my next question, but if you want to unpack it a little bit more about how the church specifically can approach politics with an eye towards unity.
Yeah, I think you just have to put everything in perspective. Everyone everyone listening to us today should be able to call out 5 or 6 things on their side of the aisle that are wrong, right? To be able to say, you know what, we do not get everything right. And that goes a long way, because I think a lot of times we go into conversations trying to act like we are, sinless and faultless, that our tribe doesn't do anything wrong and it's all your fault. Well, I don't think that's biblical, for one. If you look at when people went up and spoke to Jesus, not many of them went away with a clean narrative. And so if your narrative is completely clean and it allows you and your tribe to get, to feel like you're doing everything right, or at least you're right the great majority of the time, then there's probably a lie in there somewhere, because we all have some faults and we all have work to do. And when you're willing to admit that, I think it opens up when people know that you're not just in it to win, that you're in it to build relationships. That's a big deal. And so I think one thing that Christian leaders and folks have to do is call out and be honest about challenging both sides. When you can have that honest conversation, and that's not to say it's false equivalency. At any given time, one side could be worse on an issue than the other side. That's fine. But when you open up and admit the faults of it, now you're not protecting this perfect narrative. And I think that's really where the trouble begins, because it's fantasy, it's fiction. Neither side is perfect. And until we can have an open conversation, we're going to have some trouble. But as far as Christians go, we have more common ground than anyone. And so part of the, one of the ways I can answer your last question too, is that there's just a lack of common ground. People, we argue and we're not even arguing about the same thing. And what you should know is that when there's not common ground, you can't really even have a discussion. But that shouldn't be the case for Christians. We have the same Great Commission. We have the same Great Commandment. All of those things. We have more common ground than we could ever ask for. We have to find that common ground, even in a very polarized political landscape. And if we can't do it, I don't see how we can expect anybody else in any other community to do it.
Yeah, I think. Excuse me. So one of the areas of disunity in the church that was so kind of striking to me after the 2016 election exit polls came out was the difference between the white evangelical church and the black evangelical church that shares similar doctrinal statements. And that's, like I said, it's very concerning to me. And so can you kind of unpack that a little bit and kind of tease out what's going on there between two churches and believers, groups of believers, I guess you can say, that have very similar belief systems, but have come to very different political conclusions?
Yeah, I think it's just a matter of priorities. My community and folks in kind of coming from the traditional Black church space and some from the Hispanic churches that are similar, have really focused on issues like civil rights, racism, criminal justice. And those are the things that we've been focused on. And it's not that we don't care about issues like abortion, but if you look at it historically, we've never been able to tell people what to do. And, we've had to focus on kind of getting the basics and making sure that, we have the right to vote and things of that nature. So I don't think it's a matter that we don't care about those issues, but there are different priorities. Whereas I think on the other side, the major issue would be abortion. And I think that's an issue that folks on my side of the aisle should pay more attention to and should hold our party accountable for. But it's not the first issue on the list when sometimes you're worried about some of the basic things, and the fact that some of the rhetoric sometimes coming from the other side just doesn't seem like you're wanted on that side. And so I think it's a matter of priorities. I think it's something that we have to work through and speak through. But again, it's something that we have to make sure that we're speaking. And one of the problems that we have is we don't speak to each other. We speak through messengers and mediators who have no interest in seeing us come together, right? I think on both sides of the aisle, there are people who have no interest in seeing white evangelicals and folks from the Black traditional church coming together and having a real conversation about where we can work together. Because if that happens, that tears apart some of the alliances that they would like to see and a lot of the narratives that they would like to have. So we have to stop buying into that. We have to have direct conversations with each other. There may be things we disagree on, but I think we'll find that folks on the other side will be more willing to advocate for our prioritized issues if they know that we're going to stand with them on theirs.
I love how you talk about that. And I know from a lot of the conversations that I've had in our context, abortion was kind of like the big issue that has kind of driven our many voting decisions for people. So how do you have that conversation with those who would say, for example, like we can only vote Republican because of the abortion issue? So again, it kind of going back to that, I know you already addressed it with different priorities and stuff, but
yeah. So when it comes to abortion, this is the kind of the way I look at it. It's a serious issue. I refuse to minimize it or say, that, it's not that big of a deal. It's a huge deal. But I also believe that no issue is an island. And I think when you just look at that issue by itself, you miss other issues that may lead to it. And so are you also talking about the maternal mortality rate in states like Mississippi and Alabama and other states? Are we having those conversations? Are we having conversations about why a woman may feel hopeless in certain situations and not having support? What can we do about that? And there are other policies, and I'm far from a socialist, so I'm not saying that everything should be free and everything should be provided for people. But if you do care about that human dignity issue, I think there are other ways, there are other things that impact it, and there's other things that have an effect on that. And so I hope that we could be open to seeing that conversation too, because it does lead there. The other thing I say is a lot of this is cultural too, right? It's not just a political battle, it's a cultural battle. It's a battle of kind of piercing through some false narratives that have been placed into the public square that we really have to get at. So I don't minimize the abortion conversation. I think it's very serious. I just think people should know that no issue is an island, and there's other things that lead up to it, whether it's culture, other policies that we can look at as well. And I think kind of see a little bit of a bigger picture while we fight that. I mean, that's something as somebody who's a Democrat, I think because my party gets that so wrong, I have to fight it, I have to fight it and speak up on it even harder. And so I do that all the time.
So going back a little bit to one of the reasons that it sounds like you started the A.N.D campaign, and when you started it, you found there were a lot of people feeling kind of, I don't know if I heard it on your podcast or where, but feeling like they're in the frustrated middle. Like they they just don't have a political party that accurately represents your values. And a lot of the conversations that I have with individuals, what they end up doing is then just like shutting down to politics entirely. I'm sure you hear that a lot too. So what do you say to somebody who's just like, nobody represents my values, nobody's hearing me, they're so polarized, I'm just not interested at all?
Yeah, so yeah, there are a lot of Christians who feel homeless, and I'm not sure that's such a bad thing. It's a bad thing if you just quit and you give up, but this isn't your home, right? And so I think people have an expectation that whatever party they're in is some part of their identity, and I say no. The way that I look at parties is just a tool that you use to get kingdom work done, right? So if someone comes and has a criticism of the Democratic Party or really goes in on the Democratic Party, I feel nothing. I'm going to listen to what they have to say. I'm going to analyze and say, oh, you got a good point or you don't have a good point. It's not part of my identity. And so if you distance yourself from the party and just see it as a tool to get certain things done, then you don't take it so personally that not everybody agrees with you. You take it as your mission to do as much good as you can. So I think it's great that there are Christians in both parties. What's bad is when there's Christians in both parties that are following the party, that are doing what the party's asking them to do. No, you're there to use that as a tool to get kingdom work done in the public square. And when we look at it like that, I don't think we get so frustrated because there's almost an expectation that everybody's not going to be in agreement with me, but I have a kingdom agenda that I'm trying to get through here. And I could be a Republican or a Democrat, whatever space I'm in, I'm going to do the best I can to get that kingdom agenda through. And obviously that's easier to do when you have people with you. And that's part of why the A.N.D Campaign talks so much about coalition building and us all coming together. It is easier when you have people by your side. I mean, one of the things when I first started a group called Crucifix and Politics before I started the A.N.D Campaign, it was just a bunch of, folks in progressive spaces who came together, maybe like 10 of us. But I noticed that we would meet probably twice a month. And just from those meetings, when we would go to a Democratic Party meeting or something, everyone was emboldened. Because at that point, you knew that even if it was 4 other people in that room that agree with you, they were there. So that does matter. And we know we work as a body. And so we're supposed to encourage and embolden each other. But don't take the party as part of your identity. And I think you'll be a lot less disappointed in it when you see it just with a different perspective.
I love that distinction. That's so good. It's not considered as a part of your identity, but a tool to do kingdom work. That's awesome, man. Thank you. What are your thoughts on voting third party? Is that just throwing your vote away?
It depends. I mean, there are different situations where you say these candidates are so bad that I don't want to have to deal with it. Typically, I mean, in general, I would say try to focus on the 2 parties. I don't put third party efforts down. I think there's some great third party efforts and some I wish would have some more success. In the meantime, though, it makes most sense from a practical standpoint to me to get in one of the parties and do as much work as you can within that party and be as effective as you can in that party. We've had a 2-party system since the beginning. I'm not saying that can't change, but it's a lot of heavy lifting to make it change. My thought is that you would create a coalition that kind of is in both parties. And once you can create that and show that coalition is strong, then maybe you can have a real conversation about a third party. But I wish a lot of these third parties the best. I know there's the Solidarity Party, things that I think they do great work, have a great agenda. It's just a heavy lift.
Yeah, that's fair. So I've got one more big question, and then and we'll open it up to anybody else who has questions. And switching gears, how concerned are you about the current state of religious freedoms in our country? Do you see the denigration of these freedoms currently as a major threat, and or do you see where they're going as a major threat? Because obviously that's always a concern, but where we're at now and where you see us going.
Yeah, I do think it's under threat. It's something that Christians really need to pay attention to, and really have a strategy that transcends party to deal with it. If religious freedom remains to be a Republican issue, we're going to be in trouble. And there's a lot of reasons that people on the more progressive side of the aisle should be paying attention to it. But I'll say this: if we're going to address it in a real way and we're going to have credibility when we address it, we have to realize that religious liberty is not just a Christian issue. If we want to approach it like it's just there to protect Christians, then we're going to lose, and maybe we deserve to lose, because that's not what that's not just what it was there to protect. And so that's the first thing that I would say. But I certainly think there's issues. I mean, if anyone who's taken a look at the Equality Act, which has already passed the House of Representatives, which is something that the Democratic presidential candidate said will be at the top of his agenda, then you should be concerned. And one of the things that I'm doing is going into Democratic spaces and saying we need to be paying attention to this. And that's why I think even Christians who are Republicans should be happy that there are Christian Democrats who can speak to those issues on the other side. We have no reason to be mad at each other just because we're in different parties. But if we put those Christian values first, it's actually strategically advantageous. And so that's me and my organization have made that a priority. We think that the Equality Act, which has no protection, so basically what the Equality Act does is it places gender identity and sexuality on the same level as race when it comes to discrimination. And so someone, that's a big deal for churches, for Christian hospitals, Christian universities. So if, say, a Christian hospital didn't want to do a sex reassignment surgery, well, that's just like it would be racial discrimination, right? They could get sued. And so what would happen very quickly, and the folks who put this up there know this, what would happen very quickly is a lot of faith-based organizations would have to close because they'd just be subject to so much litigation that they wouldn't be able to fight it. That's a serious issue. The fact that passed through the House, and a lot of churches who have Democratic constituencies don't know about it, is problematic. And they did that kind of pretty stealthily. And so it needs to be addressed. But yeah, it's something we should all be paying attention to. But do not make it just a partisan issue, and do not make it just a Christian issue. It's for religious liberty for everybody. We're not here to force people to be Christian, or to say you don't have the right to be protected because you're in a different religion. We can handle that in a different space, but religious freedom in America is for all legitimate religion.
In that vein too, I forgot this question. How do you approach the balance between legislation and Christian morals? I don't know if that's clear. So like legislating Christian morals, how do you balance that, and how do you promote those things?
It's a good question. I mean, you have those who would say you can't legislate morals, you can't legislate values. Well, as an attorney, I'll tell you, I don't know of any law that was created without somebody's values behind it, right? So when we say that you can't commit first-degree murder, that's coming from somebody's values. Even zoning laws, where certain things should be. There shouldn't be a liquor store or a strip club near a school. That's values, right? And so the idea that church and state means that you can't use your values and vote based on your values or support policy based on your values is completely ridiculous. I mean, if someone who's secular progressive can vote based on their values, so can somebody who's a Christian, right? And that's always been the case. But you do hear, even from other attorneys who are in politics, and I think they know better, but they're trying to kind of create this false understanding. Values are always part of the conversation. That said, Christians are not here to force people to be Christian, right? We're not here to say, you need to follow every tenet of Christianity. And so where that line is drawn is something we have to be very careful about. A lot of times I kind of point to human dignity. Anything that's, very clearly violates human dignity is something that we don't want to touch. Something that we don't want to let people do, right? And so that's why we talk about abortion. That's a life. We don't want the life to be taken. So it's, I don't know if there's a clear line that we can say in every case, this is the formula that you would use to know if it's going too far. But I would say you want to look at human dignity. You want to look at protecting people, right? You want to look at protecting people, but also say, hey, people get to make their own choices. So I may not like how you raise your children, right? I may wish that you took your children to church every day, or that you didn't let them watch rated R movies. But guess what? I'm not their parent, right? And so I'm not trying to force those values on you. But I do want to make sure at a broader level that I'm looking out for human dignity. And I think if we draw a line, then if we draw an exact line in every case, then we're not really dealing with the complexities of that. And so you almost have to deal with it on a case by case basis based on that general understanding.
Justin, staying on that human dignity theme, we talked about abortion a good bit. Can you highlight a couple other ones where you think it's easy for Christians to lose sight of what our Christian value for that thing should be because of the political narratives or the partisanship, where it seems like those things have taken precedence over what the Bible says in regards to human dignity?
Yeah, criminal justice. I mean, that's one that we can point to. We can go too far with the kind of drum beating about being tough on crime. We absolutely, because we understand there are victims, we absolutely want to make sure that we're protecting victims, but we can go too far. We got to understand that we're broken. This is a broken world. And so we beat that drum too hard. We actually are violating people. And this country has a history of disparities when it comes to some of those issues. So I think criminal justice is a good one to point out. I think even something like housing, just to make sure that people have an opportunity. This is one of the things that I get on people on my side of the aisle on. In a lot of progressive cities, you go to San Francisco, Seattle, the only way that somebody poor can live in those cities is if they're living on the street. I don't think that's right. And so I think we do have to make provisions for the poor. We have to make provisions for the underserved, for the disabled, right? These are things that we should care about because they're human dignity, human flourishing issues. Again, that doesn't mean that everybody gets everything for free or that we, act like we have unlimited resources, but it should be a very serious consideration, especially when it comes to the poor, because the Bible over and over again talks about our need to put them in high consideration.
I wanted to double back a little bit, talking about the traditional Black church, white evangelicals, and the desire to build coalitions and seek racial reconciliation and those things. Can you give any insight? A church like ours, we're in a small town. The town is 98% white, right? And so a lot of us, it's just a very different experience. But we want to be a part of the solution. We want to be a part of the good part of that story. But sometimes we just don't know what that looks like in our context. Any thoughts, ideas that you'd share around that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think I have a really good example that's going on right now. Me and the A.N.D Campaign and some partners that we've come together with created what we're calling the Churches Helping Churches Challenge. And so what we did because of the COVID crisis, I hope many of you know that that's hit the African American community really hard. And for several reasons, it's because we have to use public transportation more, because of health disparities and so on. It's really affected that community and those churches. And so a lot of churches in the African American community, once they were unable to meet and have meet on Sundays, it really put them in a tough financial situation. And so what we did was say, hey, we know by the Bible that if one of our brothers and sisters is in trouble or they're in need, we're supposed to be the first ones to be there. And so one opportunity that I think if you have any Black churches in your area is to check and see what they need, to see if they're going to be able to survive this crisis, because many are going to struggle to survive this crisis. And many of them are pillars of their community, right? And so their community, they're the ones that are putting on, giving kids breakfast at the beginning in the mornings, putting on summer programs, feeding the poor, things of that nature. If there are churches in your area, Hispanic, African-American, immigrant churches, check to see what they need and be willing to help them out, especially when it's in a crisis with no strings attached, to say, what is your need? How can I help you? Sometimes you have to be able to do that. Now, that can be a way to build a bigger relationship, but those are just ways to reach out to people, even if it's not the Churches Helping Churches Challenge, to reach out and say, what do you need? How can I help? Without coming in and trying to fix them and trying to say, I know better. Because the fact of the matter is that big church, big budget, small budget, these churches can teach each other things. And if we approach it in a way like, let me fix you, let me tell you how to do this and that, then I think we miss something. Because a lot of churches, especially when you talk about churches that are small and low income communities, it's not that they mismanage their money all the time, it's that they didn't have a whole lot of resources to begin with. And so they have to make a decision whether to save their money and put it in the bank or actually feed the people in their neighborhood. Those are tough choices. But I would just say the general is reach out and hear them and see what they need. These are brothers and sisters in Christ, and you reaching out and caring and not automatically saying, how you'll fix them or what they're doing wrong just means a lot. And so just reach out and see what they need and be willing to engage them and let them lead you in some directions, and understand that they have something to give as well, because although they may be small and not have big budgets, they are dignified.
Yeah, and a little bit more on that. Can you talk a little bit about when you're talking about like a church in a position like ours wanting to maybe feel like we need to go in and fix, and here's how we can help, versus just trusting the work that's happening there? Can you talk a little bit about maybe where you think, if there's one or two like kind of core misunderstandings that people in our context might have about like a historical Black church or something like that, what those might be?
Yeah, I think one of them I just named was that, you're struggling because you mismanaged your money. This is not always the case. There's just not a lot of resources, and they're not trying to hoard it. They're trying to make sure that they're serving the community. I think the other thing is that they're asking for help in a way that, allows you to almost be not condescending, but, just dealing with people in a way to say, oh, bless your heart, right? To say, you need us and let me see how I can help you, instead of saying we're brothers in this. I want to get to know you. I want to help you. I want to make sure that we're peers within this conversation, because one of the problems that I think we have is that although we say money shouldn't matter and all those things, when we enter in these relationships, they're not partnerships, because somebody can always take their ball and go home. Well, because we are broken, anytime I go into a relationship and I know I can just take my ball and go home and leave the person the way that I found them, then I'm not going to do right, because I'm broken, and because that's just how people operate. We have to go in and be deliberate about the fact that we are peers. We're going to work together. We may not agree. We're coming from different cultures, but because I love you, because we share, the gospel, I'm going to do everything I can to make this work. And I'm going to, defer to you on certain things that I don't understand, and be willing to admit what I don't understand. And so for further information on that, you can actually go to churchrelief.org, and we have a best practices for churches that are contributing and churches that are actually receiving funds. We have a best practices. And I think that's helpful to kind of building relationships that'll last past this crisis. But I hope you all know there's so much that you could do for a small church. I mean, we're giving out grants for $3,000. I mean, not huge grants, but some of these churches only bring in a few hundred a week. And so that goes a long way. And so just know that you could do a lot of good if you're willing to step back and just say, how can I help?
That's wonderful. For those from our church who are listening, we talked about what we could do to help. And I think this is something that we can think about a little bit more. So that's a really good challenge. John, do you have anything else? Or you want to go to questions here?
I just got one more thing, and I just want to leave us with this note. Justin, like this vision that you're casting, and the vision that the A.N.D Campaign promotes, it's so compelling, of churches coming together, of Christians being unified in our approach to politics, et cetera, even despite our disagreements. So is there a story, or is there just something that just gives us hope that this is possible? Because I love this vision, and it is so compelling. And yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I would start by saying I think the gospel says that it's possible. I think, we know that we should not be divided around racial lines. We know that it's our brokenness within each of us that has created that. And so we can get past it. The Bible says we can get past it, and that it's our obligation to get past it. But I'll again, and I'm not trying to just promote what we're doing, but I think this Churches Helping Churches Challenge is a prime example. Let me tell you something. We started this at the beginning of April. By the first week, we had already raised $100,000 because churches wanted to help. We didn't have to do a lot of explaining. We had a lot of white evangelical organizations jumped on, the National Christian Foundation. We had a lot of, the Church of Living God in Christ from the Black traditional church side of it, all coming together saying, we're in a crisis, and what Christians do in a crisis is we come together and we stand together. This has been hugely encouraging for me, because in a lot of ways, what we were saying was theoretical. that this stuff could happen. But this particular instance has shown us that churches can come together. If we put the silliness aside, if we put the partisanship and ideology aside for a second, we can come together. It's just, are we willing to sacrifice to do that? Are we willing to kind of walk away from our tribe and let some of that stuff go to say that I'm a Christian first and I'm going to make sure my brother and my sisters are where they need to be and that they have what they need.
That's awesome. That I think just speak to someone who's listening to all this and is saying, it all sounds really nice, but it also sounds idealistic and it sounds unrealistic. Can you just speak kind of your heart to that attitude about it? Yeah,
I would say, as a Christian, if you can only see the political landscape as it is today, I think that's problematic. I think it's a faith issue, because as Christians, we have to have vision, right? We have to have the vision and the imagination to see things as they should be, right? And if you see things as they should be, it goes a long way. I'll tell you, I go to evangelical universities. I go to places, churches in my community, and people get it. I mean, you would be amazed to see how much we agree on, but we're continually told what we don't agree on and why we can never agree and why we can never come together. We're continually told that over and over, and so we start to believe it. And so what I would say to the person is that you're the one that's been fooled. You're the one that's been fooled into thinking people who have the gospel, people who hold the Bible in such esteem and really believe it, to think that they can't come together, I think it's a lack of faith. And I think you've been fooled into believing that. And it's time for you to have a little more imagination and a little more faith that this can happen. And as I go around the country and have these conversations, I'm seeing it happen. I'm seeing people say, you know what, I never thought about it that way, but I do have to admit that I get some things wrong. And when you admit you get some things wrong, and you can go to your brother and apologize and really reconcile, that goes a long way. But I would say, in order for that to happen, that there has to be action. And so we can't just have the regular kumbayas. Fellowship is great, words are great, but if we go to 1 John 3, it says, look, when your brother or sister is in need, we need to be about deeds, and we need to be about action, right? We need to be about self-sacrifice. And so that's the time that it is when we're in this kind of reconciliation conversation. It's a time for self-sacrifice and time to let our actions show how much we care about our brothers and sisters. Not because our actions or our works save us. We know that's not the truth, but they are indicative of what's written on our hearts.
That's great,
beautiful,
man.
Justin. Thanks. All right, let's open it up for questions. Does anybody have questions either on the text, or if you're on the video call and you want to ask, just like raise your hand or something and we'll call on you. Tom and Janet, did you guys have a question?
I just unmuted. If you saw me moving, it was because I unmuted. I was going to try to leave my question and go to last, because it's going to come to the abortion issue, and Justin's done such a good job of already touching on that. So if nobody else chimes in, come back to me, okay?
Sounds good.
Louis?
Hi. Thanks for your my major question was on this, how do we would ask, what would we say to these politically conservative or liberal Christians to promote unity? And I loved your answer of no issue is an island. So that led me to my next question is what thought leaders or who influenced you to help formulate your thoughts on this path forward? I mean, obviously you're a man of God, and you're quoting scripture, so I know that's one of those, but who are some of the other people that influenced you?
Yeah, that's a good question. A lot of what I did is I had to reach back to the past. I think a lot of people who are in politics today, they felt like they had to choose one or the other. So there are examples, but they're not a lot of great examples. So when I first started, I reached back to somebody like Fannie Lou Hamer, who was a civil rights advocate, someone who fought for voter rights, someone who fought for criminal justice, but was also pro-life, right? Someone who went to the Democratic National Convention and said what she had to say and was unabashedly Christian within those kind of progressive spaces. And so I went back to kind of a lot of civil rights heroes who had those biblical values, but also knew the importance of justice and dealing with the racial issues that this country has suffered from for a long time. But there are other, I'm trying to think. Samuel Rodriguez really helped me. I know he wrote a book called The Lamb's Agenda, and that kind of started me thinking this way. So I would say a lot of civil rights heroes, and then there's some, just some Christians in general. One thing that I read that really changed how I looked at some of this stuff too was G.K. Chesterton, and I think he helped me out. C.S. Lewis, Howard Thurman. I mean, there's a lot of older theologians and activists that really helped me. Dorothy Day was another good one. Somebody who was, again, pro-life, but stood with the poor and spent her life, dealing with the poor. So you see that a lot in the past. We've just gotten to a place where we feel like we need to take one side or the other today.
Any other questions?
Yeah, I got a question for you. I appreciate the way that you're encouraging the church and Christians to get into the political conversation. And I think historically, I've always been personally a little bit shy of that. And I think a lot of church leaders are shy of that because we like to hide behind the separation of church and state kind of banner and say, like, we can't talk about that stuff here. And I just love to hear some good examples where you've seen the church get that right, whether it's leaders getting it right, Christian groups getting it right, where they can be the church and yet they can talk about these narratives or these political issues in a way that balances that. I'd be curious if you've seen that go well anywhere.
Sure. I think, again, if you go to the past, that I don't think we've gotten as right as we should have as of late, but I think the civil rights movement in a lot of ways got that right. I think in a lot of ways when early on, and I think that's kind of been, we can talk about how that's kind of been co-opted. But I think early on, there was just a serious conversation about the church being at the forefront of fighting injustice and fighting a system that was kind of created to kind of hold people down. If I go to the other side, we can talk about some of the kind of the groups, moral majority groups who were fighting against pornography and saying, hey, this is not something our society should have. And so I think in the past, you see us getting it right on one side or the other. You see a couple of leaders who put it together. But I think it's time for us to do both and not feel that we have to take one side or the other. But those are two examples that I would point to where the church really stepped up and changed the narrative in a way that was important. The thing is, we've just never put that together. And I'm hoping that we can kind of facilitate or be one of many groups or just the body that facilitates that happening.
Any other questions, guys?
I've got one last one just to kind of help us bring it home here. Can you quickly talk to just maybe a theoretical person from each extreme about kind of like your elevator pitch on your work and why they should find it compelling and get on board with it?
Sure. So if I'm talking to a Christian who I think is probably too far gone on the progressive side, I would probably start talking about justice. And I would say, man, justice is important, and talk about the importance of justice. But then I would probably also bring up the fact that you can't have justice without absolute truth, right? And so if you don't have a moral truth, how can you say that there's a standard that everybody should live up to, right? If there's not a standard to say, and really what I'm getting at is postmodernism. So what's going on in progressivism right now is basically the idea that there is no truth, that there's just different situations and truth changes over time. Well, if that's true, then I can't really tell anybody that they have to be just, right? Because they may just be living their truth. They may just be doing, what they feel is best for their tribe and their survival. And so how can I really tell them that, that they have to be just or that they have to treat people a certain way if there isn't a timeless standard that they always have to follow? And so as a Christian, we cannot allow secular progressivism to be the foundation upon which we stand on, because there are just so many holes in it and it's always changing. How do you know where you stand from one moment to the next? How can you tell me in 10 years what you'll believe when things keep changing and the circumstances of the culture keeps changing, well, then you kind of run into a problem. And so I would say as a Christian, you have to believe in absolute truth. You have to believe in moral order in order to have a true belief in justice, because what is justice aimed at? And if we have a distorted view of justice, then the things that we're fighting for really just create new injustices. They actually don't solve anything. And so that's one way that I kind of go about speaking to progressives on that side, is that to have justice, you have to have absolute truth. You have to have moral order. If you don't have absolute truth, you can't tell anybody what they have to do, because it's kind of based on their perspective. When I kind of talk to people on the right, I say, look, moral order is very important. I would have a conversation about abortion and why my side gets that wrong, to let them know I'm not defending that. So that's the last thing that I'm going to do, is defend it. And in fact, I go out of my way to fight against it. But at the same time, if you look at the Bible over and over again, it talks about justice. And I truly believe that everybody, and we can play with the semantics of it, but I truly believe everybody believes in social justice. I really believe that. When somebody tells me they don't believe in it, I disagree, because I don't think there's anybody listening today that if their kid was going to a school and their kid was being mistreated in that school, that you wouldn't go up and have something to say about the people that the administrators or teachers that were mistreating your kid. I don't think there's anybody on this call that would allow the kids in their neighborhood to drink lead poison water, right? If there's something they could do about it, right? You're not going to sit there and let the kids in your neighborhood face all these consequences of drinking lead in their water. Why? Because you believe in social justice. You believe that there's a standard based on human dignity by which people should live, and you want to hold people to that standard. And so I'd say, it's not a matter of if we believe it or not. It's a matter of who we believe in it for. And so if we believe in it for our brothers and sisters, just like we believe in it for ourselves, then we will fight for that for everyone. Now, that's not to say that I defend every definition of social justice. I don't think it's a free pass to defend any kind of behavior and call that behavior a right. I don't think that's right. But I think the best way to show people what justice should be is not telling them what it isn't. It's showing them what it is. And so if you want to combat, a bad view of justice, then show people what it really is, because especially young people today, they're going to seek a definition and an example of justice. They can either get that from the church or they can go out and get that from somebody else. But that's our decision to make.
Dude, so good. Anybody else? We got time for like one more, if anybody has one. John, you want to bring us home here?
You want me to ask mine?
Go for it.
Yeah, Justin, first, let me compliment you. So much of what you said is just brilliant and so full of godly wisdom. And I hope you can help me take the plank out of my eye tonight. You've really done a good job of bringing up these issues of the criminal justice, the housing, the voting rights, the social justice, the human dignity. But I get put in a hard position like in the 2016 election and this election that's coming up, where I feel I have two poor candidates. And so it comes down to the abortion issue. And when I look at abortion and I put it on the scales and I try to balance out abortion with criminal justice, housing, those kinds of issues, they lose out to the abortion issue. And I end up letting that cast my vote. So have you got anything to say to me as my view is skewed. I'm a 63-year-old Midwestern white guy. What help me out?
Well, I would say my view is skewed too. I think we all have issues that we have to get past. And I'm not here to convince you that that's not, the right way to look at it. I'm not here to convince you to say, value that a little less and make sure you support everything else. But what I am here to say is, if that is your calculus, right? If that's how you're looking at it, then you have to be an advocate for those other issues that the Republicans are going to get wrong, right? So if you say, I just have to vote this way, then I think you have to say, okay, but when it comes to voters' rights or criminal justice, I have to find ways to talk about it, advocate for it, or hold the person that I put in office responsible for it. One of the things that we do on both sides, and I think Christians get this so wrong, is we put somebody in office, we vote for somebody, and now that's our guy or our girl, and we're just going to defend them. I voted for them, so I got to defend my vote, and I got to make sure that everybody knows this person can do no wrong, and the other side is always wrong. I think that's the wrong way to go about it. If I put somebody in office and my vote help get them there, then I'm more responsible to hold them accountable. I'm not there to protect you. You have your administration or whoever you need to protect you. I'm there to hold you accountable because I know there's things that you're going to get wrong. I know that I can't leave you to your own devices. And so that's the one thing that I would say. I'm not here to tell everybody they have to vote Democrat. I don't even, I don't always vote Democrat. And sometimes when I do, I don't just feel great about it. I think we all make votes that we don't feel great about sometimes. But one thing we better know is that I'm not there to just let anything go. I'm there to hold you accountable, and I'm there to make sure that I'm not just going along with something that's wrong because I want my tribe to look like they're right. And so I would say I understand your calculus. Again, I would say no issue is an island, and so you can look at other things. But I think there's some egregious things going on in regard to abortion. So I understand people feeling that way. What I don't accept is if there's xenophobia, racism coming out of the candidate that you supported, that has to be addressed too. And so you can't just give, I think one way that we go wrong is we give these unqualified endorsements of these candidates, and it seems like we're okay with everything else that they're doing. And so if that's the choice that you make, we can have a larger conversation about some of the other things that can be looked at, but make sure that you don't feel that's a kind of a reason to support or condone things that we know Christians shouldn't be condoning. And on both sides, there are opportunities to fight against even some of the stuff that the people we voted for are supporting. And the other thing I would say too is the vote is the end of the process, right? So there's a lot of things that we can be doing up until that. So we tend to kind of look at this one national vote as the one big thing, and everything's placed on that. Not really. I mean, that's the end of the process, but you also have state politics, you have local politics. Those are areas where you can kind of exercise and get at some of those other issues that are really important and oftentimes have more of a direct impact on those in your community. So whereas, just to be specific, I didn't vote for the Republican in the last election, and I could create an argument as to why that didn't happen. If that's what you did as Christians, make sure that you're willing to speak up against the people also, that you voted for also.
Very good.
I hope that's helpful, but.
Very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Thank you, Justin. And thank you for speaking on these tough issues with such wisdom and with such grace and truth and just being a model for how to biblically approach these things. So we are so grateful for your time. Guys, if you're listening to this or watching it on YouTube, be sure to follow Justin on Twitter, check out the A.N.D Campaign, and listen to his Church and Politics podcast. It's all good stuff. Justin, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me, John.
All right. Looking forward to unpacking all of this stuff and working through this together. So we will see you guys next week. Thanks for joining us.